You to our first online Bhakti Yoga retreat. And it's a new adventure for us, but it's a great way to stay connected with people. We've named the retreat Perspective because we find it so current for this time to shift our perspective and train our perspective, and seeing it through the eyes of Bhakti. So today we have with us Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, and he will be, who I'll put on shortly. But I want to tell you a little bit about him while you're here. Well, of course you're here. He's a graduate from the London School of Economics with a degree in philosophy and economics. And by profession, he works as one of the leading he works in one of the world's leading global investment banks, training and coaching executive and managing directors in the art of leadership. I thought that was amazing because definitely Bhuta Bhavana is someone who's out there in the world and is a Bhakti yogi and is really taking the principles of Bhakti yoga, especially in leadership, into the world. So he's also been acts as a mentor, coaching a large range of people, and he is today going to share with us how we can deal with things that happen in our life. What's our story of life and how we can deal with it. So I'm going to hand over to Bhuta Bhavana now. Just a note, there's a few ground rules. Please keep your mic muted, unlike the way I had it unmuted in the beginning of the session. And please, you can put out your questions into the chat box here, and we'll field them at the end. Also, we would like to remind you that we're here as the Bhakti Yoga Society, and we're active everywhere, different places in South Africa. And if you're a member of Bhakti Yoga in any different university, shout out to us in the chat, tell us which campus you're from, and we'd like to hear from you. So cool, I'd like to hand over to Bhuta Bhavana.
Okay, so thank you very much, Rukmini. I hope everyone can hear me. I want to begin by saying it's a real pleasure to be connected with all of you. And we just want to share in the time that we have some thoughts on our lives, our journey. And that's why we call this presentation, The Story of You. So what we're gonna share today is something that can help us to be more conscious of what life is trying to teach us. And this can play out as an individual person, but it can also play out as a global human society. And we'll talk about some of the things that are happening in contemporary society at the moment as well. But I think I'll start here. So the first point is that every one of us loves a great story. So stories have been told throughout centuries, and they're often a means of transmitting wisdom, a means of transmitting hope, a means of transmitting inspiration. And in the Vedic literatures, which is one of the oldest literatures known to humankind, it also uses stories as a way to convey the human experience, but also to help us to understand how to literally read the language of our lives, okay? And we'll dive into that in a moment. So all cultures have stories. All cultures have different narratives whereby people learn something and can consider some ultimate truth, but in a way that's very easily digestible. In fact, they found that when someone tells a story, it has a transformative effect on the hearer. And they've done some studies in neuroscience, and they found that when stories are told, if it's a good story, if it's a powerful story, they found that the electrical activity in the brain, it starts to become activated as if you were part of the story itself. Now, this is a big thing, because what it means is that in all ancient cultures, they understood that one of the best ways for transformation, one of the best ways for us to overcome our challenges, and one of the best ways for us to self-develop was through stories. Wisdom stories which conveyed ultimate and higher truth. So stories can be a means by which we can literally become better people, wiser people, more loving people, and even stronger people. So as we go through this seminar, I'm gonna ask you to think about some of these things, because my own mentor, who passed away about 15 years ago, and he was an advisor to heads of state, etc. One of his biggest things was, how do I help people to grow? How do I help people to change and transform? And in this day and age, especially now that we have the pandemic that we're dealing with, it's interesting, when there's a crisis in life, the crisis in life shows actually what we've been doing before the crisis. When there's a challenge in life, then the way that people respond to a challenge, it actually is an indicator of how they've invested in their own development before the challenge. Many people there's two ways to deal with life. There's the common way and there's the exceptional way. The common way, if you study carefully, most people, they go out into the world and they try to control all the things that happen around them. Okay, that's the common way. If you would have asked me at the beginning of the year, Bhuta, Bhavana, do you think that there'll be a global pandemic? I'd have said, don't be silly. Those things don't really happen anymore. If you'd have asked me at the beginning of the year, Bhuta, Bhavana, do you think the majority of the world will be on lockdown by March 2020? I'd have been like, come on, come off it. You know, you're joking. And just look where we are. Look where we are. The statistics are very powerful. They're expecting that during this time, there'll be record numbers of divorces or separation. Because that couple who were so-called together and in love, now they're stuck in the same space. The guy can't get out, the girl can't get out, they can't go to work, they can't do all these things. They're expecting the divorce rate and the separation rate will go up through the roof. They're expecting, unfortunately, an increase in domestic abuse, because those people living in a bad situation, you know, at least they could walk out the door for some time or make an excuse. They're going to work, they're going shopping. Now that excuse, that ability has been cut down. They're expecting an increase in mental health issues, and they're finding this. Organizations such as Samaritans, which is an organization that looks after people who are having certain mental and psychological challenges, the number of queries has gone up significantly. And why is that? Because actually, for many of us in the world, we're not fully comfortable with ourselves. So the first tendency for most people is to try to manipulate and control the external situation. And this pandemic is just one example of how that's a fantasy. There's an understanding that we cannot fully anticipate what life will throw at us. In this case, we're dealing with a global change, but every single day we experience a change. Every single day, someone is surprised by some bad news. Someone is surprised, sometimes hopefully by some good news. Someone is surprised by some unexpected change in the workplace, whatever it is. Every day we're hit by changes. And that's literally the story of life. Every day we're hit by changes. The unexceptional tendency is to try to control all the external things in life. That is both an unrealistic thing, and it's a game that we cannot win. But there is another way, ladies and gentlemen. The other option is that I can live a life where I'm continually growing and developing and evolving as a person. The more that I'm evolving as a person, the more powerful, the more deep, and the more stable that I am, the more that literally I've created my own life insurance policy. What do I mean by that? Growth and evolution of consciousness is the greatest life insurance policy. It is the greatest resilience strategy in the world. Because when we work on our personal growth and evolution, you're making an investment in yourself. You're making an investment in your own resilience such that you have you have invested in internal resources. And by that investment in those internal resources, you're able to play the game of life and to always win. So you can think of life like a business. In a business, if you're going to grow the business, you need an investment. You need to also, whatever the profits from your business, you need to reinvest them, but reinvest them wisely. And when you do that, you have greater capacity, greater scope. They will sometimes talk about economies of scale, right? That the bigger the business is, the less it costs to do anything, okay? The more people we have in the business, the more resources we have in the business, easier it is to also deal with challenges. I'll be honest with you, one company the company I work for, it's incredible. The head of the company, although none of us were expecting this situation, he actually explained to the internal and external people who are connected to the company, he said that we're in a very good place to deal with the current challenges. And when I heard that, I thought, brilliant. Because he's a very strong leader. And I understood that behavior, that's where we're meant to be in life. We all have a different karmic pattern. We all have a different karmic journey. Right now in modern society, karma is one of those words that's commonplace, right? So people talk about karma, they talk about yoga, right? You know, it's a bad karma, man. So something happened that we didn't expect, bad karma. And we all have a different karmic journey. But what we want to encourage you to do, if you're not doing it already, and for those of you who are, we're going to encourage you to do it deeper, is to really, from day to day, please make your life investment. Please invest in your own internal resources so that you are so strong, sharp, and inspired that whatever comes in life, you can maximize it. Whatever comes in life, you can transform the positive, so you can transform the negative to a positive, and you can transform the positive into the extraordinary. Okay, and we're going to talk about how this can be done. So let's go into this point a bit more. So because the Vedic culture, the Vedas are one of the oldest literatures in human existence, dealing with the human condition on all levels, both social level, environmental level, psychological level, but most importantly, what we call the inner or spiritual level. And the Vedas talk about the ultimate purpose of human existence. And it says, and this is very interesting because it links directly to the famous Maslow's hierarchy of needs, okay? It says that the ultimate goal of human existence is self-actualization, which is achieved by literally being attuned and aligned with divine will, divine knowledge, divine understanding. But most importantly, it's about being aligned with the culture, the resilience, and the fulfillment of divine love. Studies have found that when people grow up in an environment where they are loved, cared for, protected, they have stronger resilience. Even studies which were done around managers have found that the #1 strategy for managers to manage stress effectively is to have a network of supportive individuals that they can turn to and draw that support from. So we understand that love and support makes one strong and resilient. But actually the Vedas go even further, that when that loving connection is of a spiritual nature, the gain and the benefit and the effect upon one's life becomes multiplied and amplified unlimitedly. So the story of life is a concept which is really relating to our journey to that particular point of self-actualization. So a good friend of mine was actually studying movies. And it was incredible, her study of movies. She started to tell me how all good films have a certain underlying structure. And she told me this a few days ago. And I'll be honest, when she told me, I became incredibly inspired and excited. And the reason why I became incredibly inspired and excited, as she told me, because what she explained to me as the structure of all good stories, I started to understand that this point, this explanation that she was giving me, was literally an eternal principle. In the Vedic literatures, they talk about what is called Leela. So Leela is a narrative whereby the Supreme interacts in a particular environment with particular individuals, and they go through an exchange. They go through a journey together, a journey of circumstances, a journey of challenges, but also a journey that leads to ultimate success. And when my friend was explaining this study of movies to me, I started to understand that all good movies have certain underlying set of stages. And I wanted to explain these stages to you because these are also stages of transformation, and they're literally a reflection of the story of every single one of us on this call. And if we can understand these stages, and if we can apply this understanding like a framework, if we can apply the framework to our lives, you're going to be able to uncover the language of life. And you're going to be able to uncover significant messages that life is trying to teach you. And I know that as I explain this to you, this is going to resonate with many of you. Because you'll see when I'm speaking about this, you'll start to think, I've been there before. I get that. I've been in that situation before. I can identify with this. So my friend was given the example even in relation to the Matrix. So there's three key acts. So she explained the first act is you see the main character in a particular circumstance. Okay, so that main character is us, ladies and gentlemen. The first act, the first part of the journey, you see the main character in a particular circumstance, right? So they're living their life in a particular way. And the main character within that particular stage of their life, they're told something. They're given a certain understanding. They've just heard it, okay? But they do not act on the understanding. So there's two things in the first stage of our life. It's three stages. The first stage is the main character is communicated with a certain understanding, but they do not act on it. And in that first stage of life, even though they've been given some key truth, they don't act on it, but we also get to see why they do not act on that key truth. Okay, so that's the first stage of life. A key truth is delivered to us at a certain stage in our lives. We've heard it, but we do not act on it for a certain reason. So that's the first stage. Then what happens is the second stage is that main character hits a challenge in life. A challenge that destabilizes their current understanding of life and how it should be. So think about all of us right now and our situation, this coronavirus, this pandemic. So we've been challenged. We've hit a challenge, a very strong challenge, which is challenging our economy, right? So now they're predicting a global recession, right? It can be very challenging to students who, as I'm coming out of the education field, I'm expecting to go into a work situation, but now there may be less opportunity or more competition. Hopefully we can still be successful and we should work for that, but we've hit a challenge. We've hit a very real challenge. And this happens on a global level, but this happens every day to one of us in our lives, or to many of us in our lives. So at the first stage, we had some understanding, but due to some other dynamic in our lives, we heard it, but we didn't act on it. Then what happens is life intensifies the language. So when we hit the challenge, that is like something that used to be a whisper has now become a very stern statement. When I think about this for us as a global society, one of the amazing things that the Vedas talk about is how everything is interconnected, and that we are interconnected very intimately with nature. So the way that we treat Mother Earth, the way that we treat our fellow humans, the way that we treat our other creatures that all coexist within this natural ecosystem, what we would also say is ultimately like an ecosystem of all living beings. The way that we deal with that has repercussions. One good friend of mine, he was speaking to one guy, and this was just a guy off the street, your everyday guy, but the guy was very pious. I found this incredibly interesting because the guy was very pious, a very good person, he's vegetarian, very kind to people. Because of all of these factors, he had a more refined understanding of the situation. So when my friend said to him, it's a very unusual situation we're in, isn't it? What do you think about what's going on? The guy's response was that he said, I think that Mother Nature is actually upset with us. And I think that she's had enough of the way that we've been dealing with her and the way that we've been dealing with other creatures. And I think that she's actually said, I've had enough, and that's why this situation has occurred. And I thought that's an incredible, insightful point. In the Vedas, it says that different people understand things in different ways according to different levels of consciousness. So what's understood by what's obvious to someone at a higher level of consciousness may not be so obvious to someone at a lower level of consciousness. So his understanding was that actually we're part of a deeper ecosystem. If we were, and we should think about this positively as well, if we were to deal with our fellow humanity, our fellow creatures, and nature itself in a very deep and respectful way, then he actually understood that the economy would be booming. Because, and it's interesting, the Vedas talk about this, that when human society deals with the natural world in a respectful way, actually the amount of resources from the earth actually increases. Isn't that interesting? That the quality and the quantity of natural resources in our ecosystem actually increases by proper behavior and decreases by exploitative behavior. And that, interestingly enough, is a parallel that takes place on the collective global level, but it also takes place on the individual level of our lives. I've seen in my own life, as I took to a more higher understanding, that the more I didn't waste food, the more I didn't waste material, the more I didn't waste time, and the more I used time, resources, ultimately for self-actualization or taking care of my lifestyle and needs in a way that it would help me to move forward on the path of my own evolution of consciousness, the more I found that the resources I actually had started to expand. I would get more opportunities. I would get more help or assistance to expand the amount that I could do with the same amount of time. And this is a lost art in humanity. There's a book I read many years ago. I can't remember the author, but it was basically explaining the spiritual laws of prosperity. In all cultures, they understood this, that the subtle affects the external. Right? And again, it's the principle of karma. The subtle has a huge and profound, over time, has a huge and profound effect on the external. So when people lived in alignment with higher truths and higher laws and higher understanding, when people lived in a way that respected nature, respected animals, for example, by having a vegetarian diet, then actually they gained more prosperity of two types. And this is very important. The first type of prosperity they would gain, funnily enough, was internal. Think about that carefully. The first type of prosperity they would gain was internal. They would feel happier, more fulfilled, and more full inside of themselves, which is incredible. Right now, there's a pandemic which is hidden, and that is the mental health pandemic. huge numbers of people suffering from anxiety, suffering from stress, suffering from depression, suffering from compulsive disorders, right? Obsessive compulsive disorders, because of a lack inside, a deep emptiness and a deep lack of fulfillment inside, which then spills over every day into their relationships, that spills over every day into their interactions with other people, that spills over every day into their attempts to contribute to society, to do good work. It spills over every day into how they deal with their friends, their families, their colleagues at work. But that can change when we change the story. So the first transformation when we live in alignment with higher laws is the abundance inside. The second transformation over time is that the abundance spills over into our relationships, and ultimately the abundance is expressed by humanity, or by humanity and by nature, because we're living in alignment with higher laws, and therefore nature itself gives more and more. So we want you to consider this point in your journey. How am I aligning with higher laws? Higher laws meaning the understanding that life is about self-actualization and developing higher consciousness. How am I aligning with higher laws in the understanding that life is about dealing with my fellow man and woman in a way that I incite or inspire them to also move forward on that journey of the evolution of higher consciousness? How am I aligning with higher laws whereby I understand that literally time is sacred, humanity is sacred, nature is sacred, even the animals, the other living entities in the world, they are also sacred, they also have a journey. And how am I respecting that? For example, ideally by having a vegetarian-based diet or a vegan-based diet. Many people are doing that now, you know, and by giving time to my own evolution of consciousness through certain internal practices. Whether it's mantra meditation, which is a very powerful practice in the Vedic culture, whether it's contemplating books of transcendental wisdom. For example, one of the most famous books is Bhagavad Gita as it is. Whether it's connecting with other people who are also on that sacred journey, such as those who are part of the Bhakti Yoga societies who are practicing Bhakti Yoga. So we want you to think about that for a moment, because the more that you align with these higher principles of life, the more that you will be making a great difference to impact society, and you'll be contributing to a greater prosperity. Two types of prosperity: the internal prosperity of fulfillment, and the external prosperity as the material world, as the external world gives more abundantly, because we're more aligned with the purpose and the goal of our journey. So let's go back to this journey. We said the first stage is where the main character has been given some understanding, some higher truth, has heard it but has not acted upon it. They meet a challenge in life, and we all do that. In life, we all meet challenges. Now the interesting thing is, at that point of the challenge, in other words, the same message comes up, but now it's more intensified. So what we ignored before, now we try to implement that. But for whatever reason, due to either immaturity or ignorance, we either implement the understanding in the wrong way, or we implement the understanding in a very kind of haphazard way, inconsistent way. So the same truth we heard before, now the situation requires us to apply that truth. Okay, so at first we heard it. Second time, we may hear it and try to apply it, but apply it inconsistently or improperly. And then that leads to some kind of challenge. Again, so first challenge, and then the same challenge may come, or another challenge may come, which is even more intense. But as that challenge comes a second time, we're given additional understanding and guidance as to how we can apply that challenge better. And to apply that truth, we have to transform. So you plus the truth equals transformation. a lasting transformation. In order to get over that challenge that we are facing in life again and again, we have to take the truth, we have to hear the truth, and we have to learn, practice how to apply that truth wisely within our own situation in order to move through. And when we do that, we come to a successful outcome. And that successful outcome literally changes the narrative. That successful outcome literally changes the story of our lives. Because when we change the narrative, when we change ourselves actually, when we change ourselves, everything else changes. Now this alludes to the point we made earlier. We said that there's two ways people try to deal with life. The first group of people, they just try to change everything and everyone around them. But life has its own story. Life has its own journey that it tries to bring us on. And life has its own language and its own message for every single one of us. Life at this time, especially with this pandemic, but even generally, the key lesson, the key language, and the key message of life is that every single one of us, we're here to evolve our consciousness. We're here literally to become the best version of ourselves and to uncover and to honor the inherent purpose of existence. So one person put it very nicely. They said that we are not material beings having a spiritual experience, but we are literally spiritual beings. So yeah, we're literally spiritual beings who at the present moment, at the present level of consciousness, are having a material experience. It's a very, very powerful lesson. When we talk about this journey of life, there's also one other factor I wanted to bring to your awareness. And many of you will be able to relate to this. On the journey of life, we meet opposition, and opposition can be in the form of circumstances, but opposition can be in the form of a person or people. I want you to think about that. In our lives, we will all have seen that there's a certain recurring pattern that takes place. It could be that in your life, you constantly have this recurring pattern that you come across people who are domineering and who try to control you. That could be one group. In your life, it could be that you constantly come across people who are in a space where they are in need and you're required to do some kind of service to uplift them. Whatever it is, you may find that there's a recurring pattern in your life. You constantly come across a certain type of individual. When I was at university, a friend of mine, she spoke to me once about this. She constantly attracted men in her life who would just mistreat her. It was very interesting. And she picked it up at one point. Why is it that I keep attracting the same type of person? And she could eventually understand that the message that life was trying to tell her is that your mind is a magnet. The reason why you're attracting this kind of person is because you yourself do not properly value yourself. And when I say value, I don't mean in the kind of self-help way, because often they get it wrong. And sometimes in self-help, they'll tell you that you're the best and you're better than everyone, which is not realistic. So then you go out into the world with the arrogance and life just beats you down, right? So that's one extreme. We call that the mode of passion. When I think, yeah, you're the best, you can do anything, because it's not based upon knowledge. It's just a kind of sentiment where one goes out into the world and thinks I'm better than everyone. And then actually, because it's not the reality, you collide with reality. I think I can do anything, but you can't, right? I am overweight and I've done no exercise, but I think I'm going to win the Olympics. No, honey, it's not going to work that way. Okay, so one extreme is over belief in oneself. That's passion. Or there's the other extreme where I have an inferiority complex. And this is what she was experiencing. Because I have an inferiority complex, subtly, in many different ways, I communicate to other people that I feel I'm inferior to them, and I attract those people who are narcissistic, who will take advantage of me. And that's what she was experiencing. We call this ignorance, that I feel I'm beneath people. And what she realized that she needed to do was center herself in a healthy self-esteem, which is coming from what we call goodness. And when it's healthy self-esteem, it was based upon a grounded understanding that I'm inherently worthy of love because I'm as valuable as everyone else. Why? Because we are all equally part of the same divine family. I'm not better than other people, and I'm not inferior to other people. I am valuable, I am loved, I am cherished, and I am adored by the Supreme just because of who I am eternally. So she realized that the life was teaching her this lesson and was sending the same type of person again and again and again in order to give her that language, that lesson. I'd like you to transform in this way. And what was amazing is she could anticipate that if she took that lesson to heart, if she made that inner investment, her life and her story would change. Her life and her story would change. And so that journey, the 3 stages, first of all, we're in a certain situation, we have a certain type of life, stage 1. And we are given a certain crucial lesson. We hear it, but we don't act upon it. That's stage 1. Stage 2, the challenge hits us. And when the challenge hits us, if we're wise, unfortunately, many people don't even get to stage 2. They are stuck in stage 1 for many years of their life. But stage 2, we remember the lesson was given, we heard it, but we didn't act. Now at stage 2, the crisis has come. And now we try to take on board that lesson a bit more and act on it, but we may not do it so well. But if we are understanding that this is a fundamental communication from life that we need to take seriously, if we continue to practice, then what happens is we transform the experience. One of the most profound things that is understood by all spiritual cultures is that if we understand the lesson that life is trying to teach us, and if we take it seriously and give time and attention to working on that understanding, then we will literally change the entire future of our destiny. And when we understand the lesson, then actually life will not kick us anymore. You see, if we don't embrace what life is about, then we constantly get kicked by different challenges because life itself is saying, don't ignore me. I'm trying to teach you something. This material world, this entire world is like a living classroom. And our mind is the magnet, drawing different experiences based upon what we're meant to be learning in life. So I'll end on this point and then we'll open up for questions. And that is that right now we're experiencing an intensified lesson. The lesson that we're being called to understand is to honor all life as sacred by treating all of humanity and all of the wider ecosystem, Mother Nature, other living entities, we're being called to treat them properly, to honor their existence rather than slaughtering them and rather than exploiting them. And we're being called ultimately to understand that our journey is a journey of self-actualization. There's a link between the exploitation of the world and consumerism and consciousness. There's a link between all 3. And the way it works very simply is that if as a humanity, if we do not have an internal practice that gives us inner happiness, inner nourishment, then we'll be forced to be exploitative externally to try to satisfy the deep hole that we have inside of ourselves, the deep emptiness that we have. You see? So it's not just we should be nice to the environment, but no, why are people exploitative? We should ask ourselves that question. And the answer is very simple. When I feel internally empty and I don't know how to process that, I don't have a practice, a lifestyle that is able to fulfill that gap inside in a very deep and lasting way, then the only other option I have is to try to fill the internal hole with external consumption. You see? So there's a natural connection between the ecological disaster that we're in, the consumerist culture, not that consuming is wrong, but when we consume from a place of inner lack, when we consume because we are internally empty and unhappy, that's wrong. If we consume wisely based upon having a sense of fulfillment, it will change our consumption patterns in such a way that will be healthy and balanced. So it comes back to consciousness. It comes back to consciousness. In other words, if we want to make a lasting change and if we want to ensure that these pandemics do not happen again and that the ecological disasters that we're currently facing can be solved, it begins by trying to have a lifestyle and a culture whereby we have an abundance. Therefore, we can deal with the external world in a healthy, balanced way. It's not enough to just have slogans and to say that we should do something. We should look at what's beneath that. And I'll give you this example, then we'll go for questions. I was giving a presentation in America. It was on leadership, and it was with a small group of people. And as I was speaking at consistent points in the seminar, I kept getting interrupted by one gentleman in the audience. And he would interrupt and say something and, break my flow of the presentation. And he'd do it a few times. And I just paused for a moment. And externally, I felt a bit frustrated. But then from the spiritual training I had over the years, I got the inspiration to just pause. And I asked myself a very interesting question. I thought to myself, what's beneath this behavior? What's the underlying cause? Because externally, he's being interruptive, he's cutting in, he's pulling the attention in another direction. But what's behind it? And I realized that behind it all, this person had a need for recognition. So at one point, I told the class, I said, we have a scholar in our midst. From that point onwards, he didn't say a word. He was quiet, because behind the, I'm going to draw the attention back to me, behind the, I'm going to cut you off and say something different, there was an underlying need, and that was a need for recognition and appreciation. And that's what happens at higher consciousness. At higher consciousness, we don't just look at the situation on the surface. In higher consciousness, we can go beneath the surface to see what's behind this. So people say that people who exploit the world are bad. People who are overly consumeristic are bad. I say that what's behind it? What's the underlying need that's not being met that's brought us to this situation? And it is the lack of having that culture of inner fulfillment, which means that when we are fulfilled internally at the root, then naturally the way that we deal with not only other people, not only other creatures, not only Mother Nature, but literally every aspect of our lives transforms. So we want to give you that gift. And a very simple way that you can do this, a few things. One is to recognize that all life is sacred, both human and nature and the other living entities, the creatures, the animals, etc. And one way we can honor that practically is to lean more in towards a vegetarian or vegan diet, whereby we're not allowing that culture of slaughter of other creatures to take place. That's one thing we can do. Second, we can honor ourselves and our own journey of self-realization by taking some time out every day to engage in a spiritual practice. In the KC Sok, in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, we talk about mantras, special sound vibrations, which are literally consisting of sacred names. And anyone who wants to find out more, I know you can contact Rukmini, contact the organizers, that they can give you some of these practice mantras, which have a profound effect on raising consciousness and having a deeper level of fulfillment and joy for ourselves in our lives. And the third thing we can do is we can cultivate deeper wisdom and insight into what life is all about and this journey through connecting with books such as the Bhagavad Gita as it is, because they explain the journey of life, the story of life, and how we can be successful on that journey. So we explained that the first stage was that we're given a higher truth, but we don't act on it. Second stage is we meet challenge after challenge because we're trying to be encouraged to apply that higher understanding, and we apply it, but it's not so expertly done. And as we continue the practice of living by higher truths, so us plus living according to higher truth leads us to a lasting transformation that has two aspects: an inner fulfillment and an increasingly outer abundance. And at that stage, we can also be beacons of hope and inspiration for other people to also make that journey and to transform the world experience into something much greater, as we have more people who have a more evolved consciousness and are not just speaking about it, but in their own day-to-day life, they're showing the joy, the ecstasy, the brilliance, and the deep fulfillment that comes by aligning with that higher understanding. And that will be the real solution to so many of the mental health challenges, the ecological challenges, because it's one thing to just tell people not to exploit, but why are they exploiting? Right? It's one thing to tell people that they should treat others nicely, but why are they treating others badly? It begins and ends ultimately in consciousness. So I'm so grateful to be speaking to you, because as I'm speaking and sharing this, it helps me to understand and remember the trick of lower consciousness is lower consciousness allows us to convince ourselves something that's just not true. When we're in lower consciousness, we convince ourselves that everyone else needs to change. But when we're in higher consciousness, instead of becoming frustrated by trying to change the world, which does not change just because we tell them to, in higher consciousness, we can spend our time, our energy, and our resources in the place that we can guarantee control. In the higher consciousness, I can give the majority of my time, energy, and resources in order to work on myself, so that my example is sending such a strong message to the world. This is what happens to you if you're in higher consciousness. This is the joy that you will experience, the deep fulfillment that you're looking for when you're in higher consciousness. This is the wisdom that you'll be able to live with on a day-to-day basis that will transform the way you approach everything when you're in higher consciousness. And this is the love that you'll be able to draw to yourself, the better relationships, the better happiness, the greater insight, the greater perception that you're going to draw to yourself when you're in higher consciousness. We have to show people by example. As Gandhi said, and I'll end on this point and then open up for questions. Gandhi said, I must become the change that I want to see in other people. So let's work together and walk together on the journey of life, the story of you and let us use these messages in the form of challenges and people to work on ourselves through mantra meditation, through transcendental knowledge, through spiritual association, to evolve our consciousness and to fully honor the lessons of life. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to open up now for questions. Rukmini, over to you.
Yeah. Hi. I just feel so completely blown away. I just thank you for sharing that with us. You not only just told the story of my lockdown as if you're in my head, but also the story of my life. So I think that was really wow. But over to the questions. There's a question from Drew. There's a question from Dhruv Nischal. I think that's how you pronounce it, and he wants to know: is self-actualization and alignment of chakras interconnected in some way?
Very good point. So it does have some impact on chakras as a secondary effect, but it's not dependent upon the alignment of chakras. To be honest with you, and I studied chakra psychology and all of these things for years before I even took to my path of bhakti yoga. So I'm familiar with that. And I do recognize the importance of that. But what happens through self-actualization, if it's based upon bhakti yoga, automatically everything else that's required follows. Okay, so I do emphasize that particular point. Through the mantra meditation, through the study of transcendental knowledge, through the alignment with other bhakti yogis, those who are on the path of bhakti yoga, automatically all these other alignments take place, but they are secondary to the cultivation of Bhakti Yoga, which is all about the alignment with the divine through what we call devotional service. Okay.
Thank you. There's another question that I was thinking of, was that sometimes when you're in the stage of the story, and I like the story analogy because I like to write, and this is a brilliant thing for me, but in the stage where life is giving you its language, sometimes the language can be like vulgar. It can feel like it's really bashing you around. What and still it feels like we may be deaf to it. Now, on one hand, we can be people like that. On the other hand, we can encounter people like that. And in each case, what's the best advice to listen to the whisper so it doesn't start screaming?
Wonderful point. So I gave a seminar just recently, I think it was last weekend or the weekend before, about reflection. See, the unfortunate thing is for many of us, we don't create any space in our life to just step back and to think and reflect. So even though, see, it's very interesting. You can see this in our association. Oftentimes, when we ask our friends, and I'm going to encourage you, this is a practical thing you can do. Ask your friends and your family, people who know you very well, what do you think I need to work on, right? Before you ask them, take some time to say a prayer, to just ask the divine, please help me to understand what I need to work on. Make that a regular practice to pray and ask that divine if you're comfortable with doing so. And also ask your friends and family, what do you think I'm good at? And how can I leverage that more in my life? Ask that question, but also ask, what do you think is something that I really need to give attention to and work on? Because the people who are closest to us, they can often see those patterns more than we can because we have a blind spot, you see? So it requires us to be bold and honest enough to ask. It also requires us to be humble enough to ask and to really take seriously what we're told, you see? And especially you should try and do this amongst friends who are also of a spiritual inclination, you see? So that's one thing, because it helps to overcome the blind spot that we may have. Now, I do this in my own life, but I do this regularly. I'm always trying to speak to people saying, what do you think I can work on? And I try to take it seriously, but I also introspect, which brings me back to reflection. So I keep a journal and I try and think, what's the recurring pattern? What's the recurring pattern in the kind of people that constantly come into my life? And what is it that they could be trying to teach me? Or what is life trying to teach me by that recurring pattern, right? If I search my heart honestly, we all know honestly, what is my own weakness? And I'll give you an example that you can practice. If you want to do this deeply to understand the language, find a friend that you trust, sit down with them, okay? And face each other. And your friend is going to pretend to be you, okay? And you are going to pretend to be your inner voice, your inner wise voice, or your inner conscience. In our tradition, we call this the super soul or the Paramatma. So the person who's sitting in front of you is going to pretend to be you. Okay, so I'm going to be the inner voice of Bhuta Bhavana, the Paramatma, and the person sitting opposite me is going to pretend to be Bhuta Bhavana. So the person sitting opposite me is going to say, inner voice, please tell me what I really need to work on. And I'm going to play the role of the inner voice of Bhuta Bhavana. I'm going to say, Bhuta Bhavana, you know what? You need to work on this. Bhuta Bhavana, I've noticed that you need to give more time to yourself. Or Bhuta Bhavana, I've noticed that you need to be a bit more bold. Or Bhuta Bhavana, I've noticed that you need to be a bit more considerate. It occurred to me many years ago that the different people who were drawn into my life, even the negative people, they were a reflection of the person that I used to be. Right? We talk about this in terms of karma, reincarnation. The person who gives me a challenging time is also able to give me a challenging time because I gave someone a challenging time in a similar way in a previous existence. You see? Every single day, we're being reunited with old friends, right? In other words, oh, look, that's that old behavior that I did to someone else is now coming into my life space. Oh, that's that old speech or way of talking to someone that I gave to someone else in my previous existence. We're being reunited with old friends. Something that I put out into the universe, into the world earlier in this time, or even before, is now coming back to me. And we don't become down about it, because there's also positive things. But the main thing is to accelerate learning from it. One of the most amazing things I've seen in my life is when I learn the lesson changes. And that's natural, isn't it? When we go to college, you learn the lessons, you graduate, so you're no longer dealing with college level. Then you go to university, you learn those lessons, so you don't have to deal with university. Let's graduate. Let's graduate from the school of life by learning the lessons. And the most important lesson is that all of these secondary lessons are meant to give the primary lesson, which is we're meant to be self-actualizing. As we said before, we're not material beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a material experience. So let's align with the divine. And in that way, when we pick up that lesson, then everything will accelerate and we will have that fulfillment that we're looking for anyway, but we tend to be looking for it in all the wrong places.
Wow. Thank you so much. Let's graduate. That's definitely a good theme to take away. Like graduating from the school of life is so essential. I hope that this will not be the last time we hear from you on Bhakti Yoga. It's definitely been such an amazing experience. So we want to keep in touch, and well, if you can accommodate us. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Announcement just
Make
very
sure.
quickly, just on
Sorry.
that. So can I just make a quick announcement? So I have an Instagram page, and we'll be releasing more content and stuff like that. So if you want to actually follow us so that you hear about updates and different things that we're doing, just be prepared. I haven't used the Instagram page yet, so even though it's blank, don't worry about that. But my Instagram name is Ed, that's ED, and then my surname is Anoba. So A for Apple, N for November, O for Orange, B for British, A for Apple, H for Hotel. So feel free to join and to follow me on Instagram and tell your friends. And then as we release more material and different things, we'll make them available, and we'll try and make it available, this recording, but so many others that we've done over the years. And we'd love to have you along on that journey as we go on our journey of life together. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Thank you. And what you can do, Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu, is just if you give us the link, I'll post it on the WhatsApp group that most of us are on. And we can just link up from there also. I'm sure a lot of people will want that information. Yeah, you know.
And then you can just, I'll send it to you on your WhatsApp, and then you can just
Sure.
distribute from there.
Great, great. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us, everybody else. Our next session will be at 12 o'clock with Chaitanya Charan on links in spirituality and science. So he's going to be speaking about how science seems to grow us externally and spirituality seems to grow us internally, kind of leading nicely from this session. So you can join us again at 12 o'clock. Earlier, around 11:30, we'll open up the waiting room. Don't worry if we leave you in the waiting room for a little bit. It's just we're acclimatizing to the technological world. So yeah, we'll catch you in our next session. Thank you, everybody. See you there.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
How do I close this?